Well, hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graban, and I'm really thrilled and honored to be joined today by Congressman Will Hurd. He's a Republican, currently representing Texas's 23rd Congressional District. A little bit about his background. He was student body president at Texas A&M University. He then served as a CIA undercover operations officer, which included stints in the field in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. He was elected in 2014, and then last year, at the beginning of his third term, he announced he would not be running for re-election here in 2020. So, Congressman, thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
Mark, I'm great. It's a pleasure to be on this podcast, and it may be short because I've never made a mistake in my life. No, I'm just playing. This is a great concept, and I appreciate the opportunity to come on.
What was that on the campaign poster? Doesn't make mistakes.
It should have been. But no, this is a really fascinating topic. I think we learn most from our mistakes.
Yeah, well, and so maybe we'll just let you jump right in, as I ask different guests. I mean, thinking back, what would you consider to be your favorite mistake, if you will?
I don't know if it was favorite because if I learned from it, but if I would have known in advance, I wouldn't have done it, right? And it involves my first run for Congress in 2009. It was the race that I lost. And to give some context to that, I never thought about running for office. And I was in high school. I wanted to do computer science. I studied computer science at Texas A&M University. And my first year, I'm walking across campus and I see a sign to take 2 journalism classes in Mexico City for $425. I had $450 in my bank account. So I go to Mexico, fell in love being in another culture. I thought it was cool seeing things I only read about in books. And I added international studies as a minor. And in that class, the first class I took in international studies, I had this former CIA officer tell the most amazing stories. And that began my interest in the CIA. And so when I graduated, I went in. And I was the dude in the back alleys at 4:00 in the morning in dangerous places, collecting intelligence on threats to our homeland. I was stopping terrorists, nuclear weapon proliferators, Russian spies. And in addition to doing all that in places like India and Pakistan and Afghanistan, I had to brief members of Congress. And I was pretty shocked by the caliber of elected officials. And my mama said, you're either part of the problem, part of the solution. So I left a job that I liked and was really good at, moved back to my hometown and ran for Congress. Now, I knew a guy who had run races all over the country. And what I thought was that the number of votes that I needed to get was almost less than the number of votes I got at Texas A&M when I was student body president. And the district at the time, I believe it was 21 counties. Now it's 29 counties. It's huge, basically 825 miles of the border. We knew that the guy, and this was going to be a runoff. There was 5 of us in a runoff in the Republican primary. And we were going to go on against trying to challenge an incumbent. And the person that the leader of the pack in the Republican primary was a guy who had ran on that seat before. Now, nobody thought, this was a 71% Latino district. Mm-hmm. Nobody thought a black dude, let alone a black Republican, would be able to win in a 71% Latino district. But we said, hey, if we crush the vote count in all these other counties, Bexar County, where San Antonio is the largest. So we did it. In the first round, everybody was shocked. They're like, how'd this guy come out of nowhere basically and win the first round? I won that first round by about 900 votes. But I lost the runoff election. Neither one of us got 50% of the vote, so it went to a runoff. I lost that runoff election because I made a strategic and a tactical error. The strategic error that I made was that I viewed the runoff, the runoff election as a continuation of the first election. It's completely different. It's a unique entity which requires unique tactics, techniques, and procedures and a different strategy. I saw it as a continuation. That was the strategic error. Then the tactical error I made is because I'm a classically trained engineer. I looked at all of the precincts. Counties are broken up into precincts, and you can get the analysis of how many people voted for you or your opponent precinct by precinct. I went and said, let's try to reduce the delta in the precincts that we lost. And if we reduce that delta, we're going to have more people come out to vote for us. That was a tactical error, and it was my decision to do that. What we should have done was the way you win a runoff election, the way you win any election, ID your voters and turn them out. We did not do that in a runoff, and we ultimately lost by 700 votes. Now, what did I learn from that? Now, I thought I wasn't going to run again because the guy who beat me went on to beat the incumbent, and I thought he was going to be in office for 10 years.
Yeah.
But that told me that when I ran again in 2014, my entire organization was built around identifying our voters and turning them out to vote, right? And so we've never not done that. And now my internal data is generally within half a percentage points of the final outcome of all of my elections. And so it I'll be honest, it sucked, right? I felt like I let a lot of people down. I didn't know what my plan B was going to be after I lost. But those were two things that I learned.
So for one, thank you for sharing, that story. And, now it sounds like those lessons are clear. When did that become clear? I imagine like on election day and the days thereafter, like when did you figure out then what had happened so that you could learn from it?
Well, here's what I love about elections. There's a clear winner and there's a clear loser and there's finality, right? And it sucks being on the downside of that finality. However, after a few days, my team and I, we looked at we went and did analysis county by county, precinct by precinct, and the level of effort we spent in those areas where we were trying to reduce that delta, we did not see the significant change based on the outcome. And then when you compared turnout levels of the places we won in that first election versus those same precincts in the second election, you saw a dip, right? So it was clear that the folks that had voted for me the first time, we didn't get them out to the polls. And here's what generally happens in elections. The person in second place, it goes into a runoff, especially if it's tight, if it's within 12, 15 points, the second person in second place, it's like 75% of the time, wins the runoff. Because when you win, you take your foot off the gas, right? And so that was another lesson. So it was probably a few days after, and part of it was the professional, what I call the professional political class, the people that run races. They were advocating that we try to do it this other way, but I was the one that overruled them.
Yeah. Well, and the second thing I took note of in your story was the way that you took responsibility for that decision as the candidate. We see a lot of times in organizations where there's finger pointing or blaming, and it might have been easy for you to tell that story in a way, or some other candidate might have thrown whoever consultant you used under the bus instead of admitting and taking responsibility for those. So I appreciate that.
Look, my name's on the flyer and my face is on the commercial, right? And when I run commercials, I got to say I approve this message, right? And so I take responsibility for those. And had I gotten bad data, then I could have said, hey, there was some execution that was wrong, but it was my responsibility for developing the strategy. And so, but it's also my responsibility to implement that strategy in that next round, and to ensure that everybody within the organization, that there's an alignment of the values to what the strategy is. And so this is something, I think you probably talk more to business leaders than you probably do politicians on these kinds of chats. But, this can translate into other issues, right? I was on a panel once with the digital director for The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. And this was when the movie Moana had just come out. And she had said, if Moana fails at the box office, are you going to blame the moviegoers, or are you going to say it's a crummy movie? Now, I think Moana is a fantastic movie, but at that moment, if it would have failed, you would have said it was a crummy movie. But politics is the only place where if somebody doesn't come out to vote, you blame the voter for not voting, rather than saying, are you offering a product that people want to come out and in essence purchase or use? And so that's why it goes back, and that's connected to this identify your voter, right? Just like a business will be identify your customer, identify the person who you want to be, you think should be consuming your good or service, and go after them. And so I've also tried to take that philosophy into politics. And because usually in politics, you just look at historical voters, like who have voted, who is a likely voter. Well, there are more people that don't vote than do vote. And that's an opportunity, but you got to give them something that they want.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I mean, I've talked to entrepreneurs who have fallen into the trap of talking to people about, would you buy this product? And then that doesn't translate from a likely buyer into people actually voting with their wallet and taking that action. So
you need that minimum viable product that you can get out in front of people so they can purchase it and use it. And when people are buying that, then hey, add on additional bells and whistles. And so those same principles and theories translates into politics, and that's something that we've tried to do and why we've been successful electorally.
Yeah. Now, I'd be curious, how many candidates run and lose in their first election and then never run again because they get discouraged, they feel rejected? Like, how much, from your perspective, did that understanding of feeling like, oh, here were errors that I made, that these could be corrected and lead to a successful campaign as turned out?
So what's funny, I don't know the raw numbers, but when I was first running, nobody expected me to win, but they all said, oh, you got to run a few times before you're successful. Most successful candidates, most people that have electoral success have run and lost before. I think it's probably more rare that you win on your first round than going to a second. And my district is not unique in that. And so but you can't have that in the back of your head when you're running, right? You're running because you think you can win and you have a strategy to be able to win. And when you get that close, 700 votes, and you can identify the things that you did poorly or did wrong, and you can find out a way to fix that, that, and then if your team, the people you need to pull this off, is willing to try one more time, that's why we ended up doing it again. And now the difference is the environment was a little bit different. The issues were different. However, structurally and how we built the organization, we weren't going to make the same mistake. And it looked very different than it had in my 2014 organization looked very different than it did in 2010.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. You mentioned you used the phrase minimum viable product, which comes from the lean startup methodology. And so much of that methodology is about rapid learning, cycles of iteration, A/B testing, different messaging. I imagine there are candidates who have tried to apply that approach. Instead of coming up with the perfect messaging up front somehow, I imagine there's a lot of testing and feedback and iteration that occurs during a campaign cycle, would you say? I use the term MVP because I've actually done a course and won a contest at a startup. This was after I ran for Congress the first time, in between between that and the 14 cycle. And so I tried to bring some of those philosophies. Now the difference is and when you're running for office, and I think the people that have been successful, you got to articulate, what are you for? Okay, now that what you are for may resonate a little bit different in one community to the next, but the same fundamental issue is there. How I may explain my background, right, as a former undercover officer in the CIA. You may test that to see what's best, right? And so the official title when I was in the CIA was I was an operations officer in the National Clandestine Service. When you test that, nobody knows what that means, right? And so that's how we came to say undercover officer, because people understand what that means now, and it describes what it is, but that was technically not my official title. And so you do those kinds of things to make sure that you're resonating, but you can't completely change the message. I think people in the 80s tried to do that. You would say one different thing in a primary and a different thing in a general election. Guess what? In the age of social media and everybody recording stuff, you can't do it. Oh, and by the way, that's what people hate.
right? They hate people that are wishy-washy.
Yeah, and I think there are important lean startup lessons where the company is grounded in certain principles, and within those boundaries, there can be minor pivots, which is different than what might be called flip-flopping in other circles.
Sure, and in Congress, so you have your official office, right? Then you have the campaign office, and so we knew in the most competitive seat in the entire country that I was going to always have tough re-elections, and we knew that in the next 2 years that what we had to do in the official office in order to get the chance to run again. And that's why it was for me, the promise that I made when I was running the first time is based on something I'd heard throughout the district. People never saw their member of Congress. It was big. Loving County is the second least populated county in the United States of America. 95 people in the entire county, right? And so they never saw their member of Congress. And so I made a commitment that you're going to see me. You may not always agree with me, but you're going to see me. And so that was our brand promise when we were on the first time. So then when we won, we had to execute on that and make sure that we delivered. And so that's why the two governing philosophies in my office have been be a leader on national security. That's how people know me. That's what I know. That's what my passion is. And number two, be the gold standard in constituent relations. We're going to solve problems for you, whether you voted for me or not. And so those were the two governing philosophies that we knew if we could execute, then we had a story to tell in the next election so that people were able, and then those folks that were, IDing my voters, we could ID more people based on the things that we were able to execute when we were in office. Anyways, I'm getting into the weeds here, Mark, but this is how we kind of been successful.
It sounds like there are parallels between what we might call the voice of the customer in the business world and the voice of the voter. You were getting that feedback. What they wanted. They wanted to say, I assume them saying, we never see our congressperson meant they wanted to see them.
Yeah, exactly. And ultimately, look, showing up is literally like 70%, and listening and hearing these concerns. Oh, and guess what? Whether, it's a community in San Antonio where all the San Antonio Spurs live, or a colonia in the western part of my district where people don't have sewage, some of the issues are ultimately the same. People want a roof on the head, food on the table, and the people they love being healthy and happy. And when you talk about those things and you show that you can deliver on those areas, then people actually don't care what little letter is after your name, as long as you're helping their community. And I think that's the same whether it's delivering a product or a service.
Yeah. So maybe one last question that I'd really like to ask, and I understand you might need or want to answer in generalities, but I'm curious, from your time in the CIA, it seems like in that environment, mistakes could certainly be deadly for yourself or for others. So I'm curious, what in the CIA training or mindset helps evaluate, trying to avoid deadly mistakes while learning from, let's say, smaller mistakes?
It's the training. The CIA is a high reliance organization where a mistake has catastrophic action, results, right? Similar to like if you're a firefighter. And so the way we ensure we understand that is through our training. And what makes the CIA unique and special is we do the mundane things, the basics, perfect every time, right? It is, if you can't do the basics well, you can't do the big things. And so whether it's something like doing a surveillance detection route, if you're going to meet someone who's giving you secrets, you got to make sure that you don't have surveillance. And this is, it's laborious, it's time consuming, but you do it with the same level of intensity every single time. You prepare for those meetings with the same level. And so the mundane things are taken as serious as the serious things. And that's drilled into you in training. And you realize and understand that when you're out in the field, and your leadership communicates that. So as a first tour officer, I had a senior officer that put his arm around me and helped train me almost in a apprentice master craftsman type relationship. Then you had an operations chief. Then you had your chief of station, and everybody drilled in and would ask the question about those mundane, basic things, because that's what keeps you safe. That's what protects other assets. And so for me, and even in my organization now, something as simple as answering the phone when a constituent calls. A lot of times they may be angry. A lot of times it may be on an issue you don't know. But that is the most important interaction that we have with a constituent. And so that has to be done perfectly every single time, and making sure the trainee goes in and do that is there.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing, not only perspectives from campaigns, but from some of the mindset in the CIA. So again, our guest here today has been Congressman Will Hurd, representing Texas's 23rd Congressional District. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your thoughts with us here.
Mark, I appreciate the opportunity. This was fun. I'm looking forward to listening to the other folks you interview.
Oh, thank you.